Welcome to another Healing with Confidence podcast. In today's interview, we talk with Wayne Knight. Wayne is the executive director of Holistic Management International, bringing over 27 years of ranching experience utilizing holistic management practices. Before assuming his current role, he ran a successful livestock operation in South Africa, where he implemented regenerative agriculture techniques to improve soil health and land productivity. Wayne has been actively involved in training and mentoring farmers, speaking at numerous conferences, and hosting educational events to promote sustainable agriculture. His commitment to regenerative farming has made him a respected leader in the field. So without further ado, here's an interview with Wayne.
One more thing. Do you want to boost your energy, mental clarity, and focus in just 30 days? Click the link below so that you can download my free guide with 6 simple changes that are going to help you feel amazing and confident. And if you're ready to dive deeper and uncover the root causes of your symptoms, book your free 45-minute exploration call today at nutritionwithconfidence.com. All right, enjoy the interview.
All right, Wayne. Well, the first question I've got for you is the idea that cattle are destroying the planet a myth, or is this true?
I would say it's true that cattle are having, in very many cases, a very negative effect. Um, it's about the management. It's probably a well-known analogy, maybe, that a hammer can be used to build and a hammer can be used to break. It's not the animals, it's the management of the animals that causes the negative. And I think we need to be a lot broader than cattle. I would say that unmanaged any livestock, and particularly wildlife, there's a myth or a misconception that wildlife can't do damage. I've just spent some time in South Africa in Kruger National Park, and parts of that park look beautiful after rain, and parts of that park are ravaged because of inappropriate timing of those animals over many, many years. The movement of animals, as influenced by humans, and we need to take responsibility for that. It's all about the timing, understanding plant physiology and growth. Yeah, it's not about the animals being negative. It's about how they're managed, for sure.
Can you get more into the weeds with that? What is the difference in management between what's common with industrialized farming practices and then what is a better way to manage them?
So, I mean, that's a pretty deep question. It might not sound so deep, but a lot of our psychology and a lot of the way we think about things is taught and ingrained. I think one of the early messages that a mentor of mine brought to the understanding is most of our colleges, most of our schools are based on a Western European, I mean, talking very general, on a Western European way of thinking. And Western way of thinking about land is related to the environment from whence it came. You take a moist environment where there's moisture throughout the year, moisture at soil surface. Germany, the UK, Holland, big parts of France, not the whole of France, certainly not Spain. But you look at northern moist Europe, if you want a piece of land to stay in grass, in livestock production, if it's overgrazed, overutilized, you simply remove animals and it will recover. And this is very simplistic. I mean, bearing in mind that large parts of the UK and probably Holland and Germany are actually overgrazed, that they're not given enough time to recover. But you take that mindset of, well, if we take animals away from a piece of land for a time, it will recover very quickly. And you transpose that thinking to an arid environment where animals are essential to nutrient cycling. And you think that well, we'll take land or animals away from the land, and it's now going to recover in the absence of animals. It's much drier. So now we have this mindset of, well, we'll let the animals be out for a very long time. And you look at degraded land, particularly in South Africa and the US, the conventional wisdom says take animals away and it will recover. That's crazy because that's not how it works. Alan Savory's insights help us understand that it's the timing of animals, that animals are the warm, moist environment in which nutrient decay, microbial activity can happen throughout the year. Then suddenly, how you look at that, oh, take animals away and it will recover paradigm must fall away. Anywhere where big herds of ungulates roam, they were hunted by huge packs or big packs of hunting animals. They moved large distances, they moved at high densities. In fact, grass is the most recently evolved plant. Grasses evolved with ungulates. That Western European forest environment treatment of grasslands is not appropriate for most of the world. And yet that still forms part of the psyche of you've got to let land recover without animals. And this, in a way, very simplistic notion that if you want a piece of land to recover, you simply take the animals away, and wildlife can't damage land. Of course, wildlife can damage land. There's so much evidence of it. Australia, national parks, hugely responsible for soil erosion. Southern Africa, very, very vivid examples. All over the US, vivid examples of parks with too few animals and no timing are deteriorating at a very rapid rate, faster than poorly managed farmland or ranchland right next door.
Wow.
So fascinating because this is kind of the idea I grew up with. If you just leave the landscapes, the national park, the national forest alone and don't manage it, it will naturally regenerate and be in optimal health. But what I hear you saying is we as humans need to take responsibility in managing all landscapes. And if you really look throughout history, for example, in North America, the indigenous people to North America were actually pretty active in managing these landscapes before Westerners came and really wreaked havoc on the bison population,
Yes.
et cetera.
Yeah, I want to make it very clear that I think I don't know that well, hold on. Let me think about how I answer this very carefully.
Hmm.
I would say that all over the world, whether they indigenous people or outside people, I'd say that let's look at not in North America alone. Let's look at the Middle East. Let's look at Africa. Let's look at wherever there are people involved. Don't want to make this a local versus foreign
Hmm.
subject because I think we fall into traps when we do that. If you look at the accounts of the British soldiers fighting against the Zulus in the eastern parts of South Africa, those early battles, the only place that there are recordings of washouts and gullies and soil erosion is where people had been established. Local people had been established for a long time, where there were tsetse fly and rampant malaria, and people couldn't take cattle because of Nagana, or people couldn't go because of malaria. There were no dongas, there were no washouts, there were no gullies in which soldiers could hide and not be shot at, not be speared. I would say we need to look at this as a human problem. That you look at Greece, it's deteriorated massively from the ancient Greek times. So much so that even the great philosophers really understood human nature and human motivation, but none of their thinking was environmental health. They took environmental health as a norm, as a given. let's go anywhere in the world where there is a brittle environment, that is, where there's a very marked fluctuation in moisture across the year. You see degradation because people have not appreciated the importance of animals and the absence of animals for the time that it takes for plants to recover. Once we mess up the predator prey, soil life, plant feeding interactions, when people's influence became too big, those ecological systems just crashed in whatever time frame it took. Stan Parsons started ranching for profit. I have very vivid memories of him showing burnt areas in Saudi Arabia, burnt tree stumps. I look at that environment now and assume it was always, it's thousands of years that it's been degraded. In our early lifetime, my early lifetime, there were fires there. It's deteriorated at an increasing rate. We're good at observing as a species. We are very, very good at observing. We come from hunter-gatherers. What we lack is what happened when we were kids, what happened in our parents' time, what happened in our grandparents' time. We don't connect the time very well. And we losing that perspective. We lose that perspective completely because we're not looking at or appreciating that, let's call it the Western influence, our entrenched mindset. That's the egg crux of our destruction, if you like. That on the other side, when you start working with nature, when you start moving animals, even if you do it pretty poorly, it's incredible how nature responds with that time. Yeah.
Mhm. So I'm hearing you say that it's different than just taking a step back and letting nature just do its thing, right? Like, but we have to recognize our own. We've always been influencing nature. We've always been a part of nature, and we've forgotten all of the input that our ancestors have had
Mhm.
on our environments. And so by re-engaging with it not just taking a step back, but re-engaging with it, observing, and actually, even if we poorly manage some animals on land, that we can actually do some good now if we take that ownership. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
I'd say it's even deeper than that. Yes, I'm agreeing with you, but I'm saying that it takes a little bit more effort on our part to be humble. We are taught that we are
Mhm.
dominant. We are the species. We are, maybe religion has a bit of a part to play in this, but we are, have dominion over the fowls in the air and the whatever and whatever. We have that's a God-given right. That's one perspective. The other perspective that I find really difficult or challenge that a lot of people find hard is we taught that as managers we are problem solvers. So when we see a perceived problem, we want to fix it, change it, influence it at the least cost in the quickest time.
Mm.
We haven't got the perspective of how do I observe what is happening and take responsibility for that occurrence and change what I'm doing to get the outcome that's good and that I want. Weeds, trees, all sorts of things that happen. Problem plants, problem insects, problem animals. We take this, it's a problem approach rather than what is the solution? How can we work in harmony? How can we change what we're doing? Because very often those plants that we see as a problem are actually a symptom of our management. I like to encourage people to think about if you've got whatever's on your land right now, you go and look in the mirror, that's because of the growing conditions that you've created. You have created that species, whether it's good or bad, that is a direct reflection of the things and the activities that you have made. And our gut or default reaction is fix it. And generally, that fix it means apply something, burn something, chop something, push something, bulldoze something, not, hey, what was this like way back?
Mm.
What could it be? And how can my management decisions influence that outcome? People who do this successfully envision and manage, it's incredible what they can achieve because of the investment, because of the tweaking of what's happening. So it's observation and it's humility in that approach. It's a
Mm.
very different mindset.
Yeah. And Wayne, I want to get into your story a bit. My understanding is that you were a conventional farmer, and you shifted to holistic management. Was there a moment that really uh, was responsible for you making that shift, or what was it for you that where you made that shift?
So, to be honest, I grew up in a very open-minded environment. My parents were some of Alan Savory, Stan Parsons were consultants at the time in the late 70s. My parents were some of their, if not their first clients in South Africa, because those two are from then Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. Um, so I think back in preparation for this conversation, I was thinking back of being a very little guy and being, really affected by bare areas on our property, areas that had been plowed and let go back to nature and were hard capped. And I remember Stan Parsons saying, well, this is because it was not grazed enough. And that was an absolute, you know, can't be. This doesn't need more animals, and wrestling with that thought for a long time. So I would say I've been pretty privileged that I didn't come from, let's call it conventional. My dad has always been, always was pushing, testing, trying. Um, but we did make huge shifts in that management when I got back to the farm. We pushed much bigger herds, so we, you know,
Mm.
and did the planning, went through the rigorous grazing planning procedures. The financial planning component of holistic management really saved our bacon at a really tough time in the mid 90s. Um, so I would say it's a multiple of, what do you call them? Learnings, lots of mistakes. I'll be quite happy to admit that I've made numerous really dumb mistakes that I hope to help other people avoid. Um, it should be a process of continual improvement rather than massive and risky changes. I've tended to be that risky change guy, and in hindsight, could have made my life a lot easier.
And
Well,
I,
what?
okay.
Oh, I'm so curious if there was one of those big learning moments that you could share that you remember clearly.
Oof. Yeah, there's so many. I remember going to Dick Richardson. Did I did my initial training with Dick, and he mentored me both through starting up in holistic management and then as an educator. Um, I remember the absolute epiphany of recognizing what I started out talking about, this realization that a lot of our paradigms on ecology stem from education. It's what you taught, it's what comes through in magazines. It's reinforced this idea. Oh, I think that the cattle narrative, maybe it's just my circle, that the cattle narrative, cattle are evil, is less of a factor now in my life than it was when I was reading National Geographic as a kid. And livestock are bad. It's the livestock that cause the desertification, that cause the degradation. So when I heard all this and saw all the photographs of massively improved land and really dense herds, and we've got to do this to fix the land, my impulse, my instinct was, well, we've just got to lump these herds together. We had 5 herds, and so we went from about 150 cows in a herd, many herds of 150, to about 650 in a herd. And that's cows alone. Now we had all the calves running around with them, and we didn't have the water infrastructure. And Dick warned me. He said, Wayne, why you want to do that? You know, you don't need to be that drastic. It's going to cause you all sorts of problems. And my mentality was, well, we the only way to do this is to just do it. We'll figure it out as we go along, young and naive. And
Mm.
of course, things didn't go well. I had a lot of resistance from the team, that the employees who were working for us, for me, me being the junior guy, but given enough rope to hang myself. My dad let me make big mistakes like this. The conception rates fell, animal performance wasn't where it should have been. We didn't have the right amount of water, hadn't worked through the bull numbers that we really needed well enough. So a whole host of things that happened because I really didn't know what I was getting into, um, and landed up making my dad really cautious of my decisions, which was a huge issue. If I'd done made smaller changes, been more systematic about it, and not try to make it all happen at once, he would have had more confidence in my management decisions going forward from that time.
Mm.
So, yeah, because of the poor animal performance, we had poor cash flow, there was financial strain. We
Mm.
couldn't do any infrastructure development because we didn't have the cash flow. We were in survival mode. All of those things knock on to mean that I really had made a mess of things. And rather than we did improve the land, but to what end? We didn't have
Mm.
the cash flow to do anything. So really
Mm.
hamstrung when with good intentions, but much healthier land when you don't have the animal numbers. You can't grow the animal numbers because the cash flow was bad. We had to sell more than we could have kept to grow into the extra grass that we'd grown. I actually
Mm.
created more of a problem because there's something magical when you put animals together and create density. You grow a lot of forage, but if you're not in a position now to grow the herd to take advantage of that extra growth, um, all of the cogs don't gel, and all you have is a mess. So the big message to me is just go slow and steady and you'll make progress. You don't need to change this. And it's another one of these, you know, learned concepts. Maybe we're not taught enough to make mistakes. And the other side is we're not taught enough that a little bit of improvement that's less risky will get you further quicker than big, bold, let's call them dumb changes.
That's a really good example. Thanks so much for sharing that.
And I resonate with that way. And there's a part of me that likes to make big drastic changes when I learn about something, I get really passionate about it. And sometimes, oftentimes, the small changes are a lot more productive in whatever
Yeah.
sphere of life. So
Yeah,
I yeah.
yeah. When you're thinking about all the variables that change, and when you're embracing complexity, it's important to think
Mm,
this through. You're changing the management the way people are used to doing things. That's the hardest. People are the hardest part of any change that you do.
mm.
I had resistance from my dad. I had resistance from the team. I even my backer, my mom, was going, "What are you doing?" So yeah, that's the biggest challenge. The animal condition. Well, you can split the herds apart. You can go back to, but once you've fallen over, people look at you differently, and that is. And when the pocket's hurting, then there's much more when the cash flow's hurting, there's a lot more opportunity to not trust.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
yes.
absolutely.
It makes a solid foundation a little more rocky when we get
Absolutely.
through
Yeah,
in those situations for sure. So
absolutely.
how did you get out of that issue? Like what was the next small change that you decided to make after that big
So, I mean, as happens in life, you go from one thing to the next, and you don't very often don't see it coming.
Mm.
I did that holistic management training in was it 97, 98. It was three different modules of training over a few months, and got married in between. Was very quick to put the animals together in 97. 98, we had cash flow crises in the business, and we really had to make some drastic and radical changes in the way
Mm.
we did our financial planning, and holistic financial planning was particularly impactful in that. Interest rates went to 28%. That's what we were paying on loans for a property my dad had bought. And the holistic financial planning really was an eye opener. We thought we were running a pretty bare bones operation. And the analogy, if you want to make small changes, change the way you do things. And if you want to make really big changes, change the way you think about things. That's Don Campbell up in Canada's quote. But
Good.
I think the financial planning is a big part of, you stop thinking about things the way you've always thought about them. You're making small changes to save small amounts of money. When there's a crisis like that and you have a planning process to go through, because when there's stress, you're not very creative. When there's lots of stress, you're far less creative. So having a process to go through calms it down. Having a decision-making process makes it not personal. I think that was a huge part of our journey, was having a combined goal that we spent a lot of time on working together to figure out what we all wanted and how we were going to achieve that. And then having this very objective process. It's a management process. That's what holistic management is. Going through that process, and it not me defending an idea or my dad defending an idea. We were really working at it from the viewpoint of what have we agreed on and what's the best way to get that. That huge change in mindset meant that we could do things collaboratively that we had not been doing. We were at odds with each other because we'd never clearly defined what we wanted and how we could achieve that. Him young, me old, and with that difference, very different priorities, very different risk appetite, very different, but we could accommodate it. So having all of that together meant that we could really make the changes that were necessary to survive.
Yeah.
And plan things very differently. I mean, we thought we couldn't cut expenses. We cut expenses by like 60%. It was just this massive slash. It meant that many sacred cows, in inverted commas, got chucked out the window because it was desperate times. But very thankful for a process. And, that was a mainstay of that situation.
Yeah, I love what you're talking about with that mindset shift being, really a big shift, but it is actually quite small because of the impact, I guess. Well, I mean, it was a huge impact, it sounds like, but I think of mindset shifts to be like if you're driving a boat and you're trying to get, where you're trying to get to and you're trying to get over here, you're not going to make a huge the mindset shift is that tiny little incremental
Mm-hmm.
turn to the steering wheel that gets you in that direction. But it is small, but it's massive, right? Um, I wonder, is there a part of you that gets frustrated that if if everyone had the goal to just make sure that the land was taken care of, like the way that you did that with massively increasing the herd, if everyone had been on the same goal of just caring mostly about the land, without the financial constraints of just the world we live in, does that ever frustrate you that we have to live in this kind of greater societal influence of like making the cash flow work? Does that?
I've not thought about it like that, no, because I think that's just a reality. I will
Yeah.
say that I think if you don't have a very clear financial outcome, it makes decision making much more difficult. I think it's just a reality. Whether you look at it on a constrained resource basis. We're always going to have constraint. If you got all the money and
Right.
then now you're wondering about how to best spend your time, or you can't get something, there's always a constraint. Now, for me, holistic management's actually, if you dig down into what is it that we talk about, let's put the ecological insights and principles over here on the one side. The core is, what do we want, and what's the best, most efficient way to get to that outcome as we possibly can with limited resources. Now, that's whatever limited resources. It's making those changes. The concept of weak link, financial weak link, economic weak link, call it theory of constraint, is a central piece to holistic management. It's about measuring those options, testing which one is going to work, that's going to improve your quality of life, your values, achieve your values, and make sure that we at least keeping the land in as good a state as it currently is and not deteriorating it. Best case, making it better. That is the tension in the goal and decision making. That's where the power comes from. If you are constantly and methodically using that, you can make wrong decisions. You can make huge mistakes as long as you're aware that, because no mistake is worse than the perfect choice, right? There's never a perfect choice. It's always going to be a bit gray. And if you're embracing complexity, you know that a lot of the time, whatever you do is not going to be right. If you embrace that, you're looking out for, are we on the right track? Yeah. Are we actually achieving what we want to achieve? And doing that effectively with limited time, because we're balancing quality of life, which is some leisure. You can love your job, but you have to take a break. Keep Stephen Covey, sharpen the saw. We've got to do that stuff. So there's always this tension. The better we make those choices consistently, the faster the progress. And that's actually what it's all about. That is actually what it's about. But it's this really strong focus on, I'm buying this thing. Is it going to be good for the environment? Is it going to be good for me? If we as society could make decisions on that basis consistently, we wouldn't need policies. Yeah. We wouldn't need laws. If we could all operate on that basis, and we would be voting with our dollars and our choices consistently, be taking responsibility for our actions. Yes, we'd need information to help us make better decisions more consistently. But I mean, that's actually just life management. Yeah. But it's holistic in that it's taking into account your finances, your quality of life, and what the environment's got to be like critically. That last piece is what makes holistic management. They're management frameworks. Holistic management is the one that I'm aware of that brings in what must this environment be like well into the future to sustain these values and these qualities. And I think that's where we've gone wrong a lot of times as society, is we don't balance environmental possibilities or realities with our aspirations of what success and happiness is. I know that's getting really philosophical, but
that's well put. And yeah, that really resonates with me. I know for us, we haven't, we've just been small gardeners, we haven't managed big landscapes by any means, but just in terms of the environment in our own lives, that understanding we are a part of this really complex system, as the two of us have learned more about environmental issues, agricultural issues, like just making small changes at a time for us, just with where we put our food dollars, right? When Natalie and I first got together, we would spend thousands of dollars a year at the grocery store. We have, over time, gradually shifted that to the farmer's market, to buying a quarter beef from our local rancher, to buying local vegetables from organic farmers who are doing more regenerative, no-till practices. And so I love what you're talking about of making just small changes at a time within the complex systems we find ourselves in. I wanted to talk to you a bit about desertification. I've scratched the surface just a little bit with Alan
Uh,
Savory's work, and my understanding is that a lot of landscapes are desertifying. And so what's happening there? Could you talk more about what's happening there, and then can we do anything to reverse this?
it's happening, and it's a symptom of management, much like the weeds example. It's similar for these big landscapes. I don't know when last you flew over the Southwest United States. You look out the window. I love a window seat. And I look out the window and you fly for miles and miles and you see red earth.
Yeah.
Miles, 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 miles. Nature abhors bare ground. Nature doesn't like bare ground. Um, and you read the old accounts. I mean, one of my early stories, I did some consulting internship type work for Stan Parsons and Ranching for Profit back in the mid 90s and visited a rancher on the Texas Panhandle. And he talked about how his great grandfather had run 3 times more animals than he currently could.
Mm.
So, what is the degradation there? I was with Alejandro Carrillo and fellow Mexicans at the Society for Rangeland Management, was it week before last, and they were talking about Spanish explorers' accounts traveling from Florida on horseback through the southern US at speed that couldn't possibly be imagined now because of the brush. Southern Africa, you read about accounts of millions and millions in herds traversing that landscape that is now thorn, brushy thorn country. There were no trees. I mean, an old man who lived when Volker's uncle Volker's lived just down the road from us in his 90s. He was That's probably 20 years ago. He was in his 90s and told us, pointed to the hill. That's Falkop, old grey hill over there. Was where he went as a kid to get firewood. There were no trees, and the entire environment there now is trees and brush. Is it? We can get into all sorts of discussions around why that is, but we're talking massive landscape change because of human management, and I call it is management. It's choices and decisions that we've made that have led to what's going on. We can't shy away from that. You can see it happening all around. As a university student, there was a new highway put in to my university town of Pietermaritzburg, and the new highway went past Ladysmith. I remember driving down that road and looking at the grassland, and if you drive down that same road now, it's brush. In my
Mm.
lifetime, it's thick with thorn brush trees. There's been massive ecological change. I would call it a massive ecological decline because of those management changes. On my property in South Africa, with management and focusing on outcome, we want grass. We want as much grass as we possibly can produce after those early lessons I explained. So let's build infrastructure and invest in livestock. And with seasonal variation, make sure that we're utilizing the forage effectively, that we're growing. So that means managing for building herd size and then shrinking in the dry, because you can't get around that. But with that management, trees started to die on a massive scale simply because the soil microbial population had changed that significantly that it was no longer favorable for trees to survive. You asked me about desertification. I would say it's habitat change, drier, favoring trees, and let's not say trees, let's say plants that are suited to a more arid environment. We have, through our management, um, res- created growing conditions that only shallow-rooted plants can survive. There's less water holding capacity. We know the soil carbon content on these soils has declined dramatically and at an increasing pace over time because of our management. And that's coming back to that initial story. European perspective. If you want land to recover, you take animals away. When it's wet, you put the animals back. That very simplistic worldview or ecological interpretation, plants need much more time in these arid environments to regrow. And it's that lack of animal at number, high level of utilization, accelerating the mineral cycle. What's there as plant material goes through the rumen, through that warm, moist environment, back on the ground, available for plants. The animals move away because of they're being hunted, and they at large numbers. They can't stay around. Now, it's a long time. What's that long time? Sometimes they come back quickly, too quickly, but most of the time there was sufficient time for those plants to regrow, for there to be that diversity of plants there. The accounts, if you dig into what managers are doing with density grazing and recovering soil and growing soil, it's just astounding what's possible when we start playing the game. If we start mimicking what nature did, it's so exciting. In terms of nutrient density, in terms of biodiversity. I mean, Jonathan Lundgren, Peter Bick's movies about what's happening in these environments with just carbon getting brought into the soil and held there, in terms of insect life that comes back because we're not killing the soil that's needed to support all the life that can happen if we get the timing get the timing right.
So it's really the man-made decisions of either overgrazing at times or undergrazing, you're saying, at the right time.
Yeah, it's just not observing and being accountable to those changes over time. I would say it's as simple as that. I look at what's happened to Botswana. I went to Botswana as a young boy going up to the Okavango swamps. Through my life traveling across Botswana, it's degraded at an increasing rate. There's no private ownership. It's common property. People graze wherever they want. Wherever there's food, the animals go. Look what's happened there. On the extreme opposite, look at what happens when a piece of land has no animals on it in an arid tending environment, or where there isn't this ability for plant material to be cycled through a rumen. You drive in Texas, where I live, and you'll see a fence line on a prairie, and on one side it's grassland, and on the other side it's trees. And it's not by chance. That is a management decision. The trees are where there have been no animals for years and years and years. People say it's lack of fire. Fire has a role in ecology, but it's microbial balances that grow trees. You look at a piece of land that stood for a number of years without any animals, and you will see a progression of trees, of woody species. It starts with small woodies, and it grows and it changes to big woody trees. The more woody the environment, the less grassland environment it is. We've blamed it on fire or lack of fire. It's the animal component that keeps it, in my opinion, the animal component, this fascination with fire as a tool, when most of the research on fire has happened without animals. If you have a plot that's burned and a plot that's not burned, well, you have two very clear, distinct arguments. Who's doing fire animal combined? It's not happening enough, in my opinion, because that's how this environment evolved. Read the stories on what happened with those buffalo herds. You got this artist. I mean, I read the story about an artist setting up his easel, and he's going to paint this beautiful grassland scene with a forest in the background. And literally, the forest figures out is on the move. It's a herd of buffalo. It's bison moving across the plains. And he thought it was a forest. That's how many they were. It's
That's amazing.
what? It blows the mind when you read about it took 4 days for a herd to move past a town. From the first to the last was 4 days of thick migrating animals. They talk about the accounts, many of them in southern Africa are once the animals had passed, it looked as if a fire had passed over it. Of course, the fire hadn't. None of the carbon had gone into the soil. All of that was passed through a rumen and trampled back onto the ground, into the ground. Dung beetles would have done their work and put most of that dung straight into the soil. Where's the methane? Where's this methane issue? You started, are cows evil? Hell no. There were far more ungulates around pre-settler, pre-colonial time than there are now. It's the same methane, it's the same carbon, it's just been cycled very, very differently. How can it be the animals that are to blame? There's been this, grasslands are completely reliant on animals. You take animals away from a grassland and see what happens. It turns to trees, not because of fire, because of the lack of animals and the microbial changes that happen because of the lack of animals. To me, it's obvious. I'm not a scientist. This is pure observation. To me, it's very, very, very obvious because I've reversed it. I've actually reversed it without fire. I've killed trees just with livestock. I'm not trying to. Just growing more grass.
All the tree lovers are going to be all the tree lovers are going to be sad that we're getting rid of the trees so we can have more grassland. But I love trees. And they have a place.
Absolutely. I'm not saying turn forest into grassland. Certainly not. I'm saying keep grassland grassland.
Yes.
They have their niche, they have their place, and they're most threatened. It's been the easiest places for humans to turn into croplands. Grassland birds are in decline. Grassland, anything grassland is massively endangered or threatened, or population decline is terrifying. We need grasslands. They sequester an incredible amount of carbon if that's something you care about. They're incredibly productive in supporting life and meat if that's something you care about. And I'm not saying beef, I'm saying meat. Whether it's sheep or goats or camels or bison or whatever, or a combination of, that's even better. But if we want protein out of places that shouldn't or can't produce crops, and it's nutrient dense, it's healthy, it's what those animals were evolved to digest. Mimic nature and amazing things happen.
Where did this story or of this tradition to kind of slash and burn come from? Because I've seen documentaries and heard of a lot of people starting to do this, even to the Amazon and it seems like an uneducated way to, but I'm sure it's come from somewhere. I just don't know where did this idea come from? This is the best way to start a garden or a farmland.
Okay, I'm going to start by saying something that might not be intuitive, but for me, we must understand that any person who's connected with the land loves the land. So let's check out the notion that people damage their land intentionally. I would say that is not where it comes from. If you look at where slash and burn happens, it's generally high rainfall, thin soil. So the Amazon and many parts of Africa, you land up in a situation where you have thin soils, there's big forest growing on it, you cut down the forest, you burn the ash, or burn the trees to ash, and then you grow crops in it, and you can only do that in a very short space of time because the nutrition is gone. The nutrients in the soil leach out, are used by the crops, but mostly it's leached out because the biodiversity, soil microorganisms are killed off. They no longer have the food and photosynthate because it's been slashed, burned, and a small crop grown there for a season in a seasonal way. If you think about regenerative ag or a natural process, there's lots of roots, there's lots of growth, and it's the microbe plant interactions that are keeping the soils holding the nutrients, growing the soil microbiological population. You kill that all off, and the nutrients very quickly vanish from the system because mostly from just leaching out. So that means, well, what do we do now? Economics, we move on, we cut again, and we slash and we burn, and we leave that piece of land behind us because it's farmed out. That's a survival thing. It's a lack of education thing. It's a poor crop management, ecological management, survival technique. It's not bad people, it's ill-informed people doing what they feel they have to do to survive. Could that be replaced by something much more sustainable? Absolutely. It's the same mindset as in ag, get big or get out. If you've got a small farm and you're not making money, the only way to survive is buy your neighbor so you've got more land. That's this lack of mentality. It's the same thinking as slash and burn. I've got to get bigger to get more acres, to get my overhead costs spread over more acres. I'm producing a poorer quality product, but I get paid by the ton. It's actually the same mentality. I think you'll agree.
Yeah, it's very short-term thinking and survival.
And it's all I can do, victim mentality, whereas small, think of the soil, how can we build it? How can we keep growing plants in it? How are we farming those microbial populations? How are we feeding those microbial populations? How are we building what we've got is what enthuses us about this conversation. But it's the lack of, or it's the mindset of scarcity that feeds either large scale ag or slash and burn ag.
Yeah.
And you've touched a bit on this so far in this conversation, but will you talk more about what exactly the process looks like with holistic management? I know it really varies, but maybe even what exactly is happening in the soil when we manage a landscape holistically? Like from what I've gathered so far, the plant roots, perennial grasses are intact in the soil, cycling nutrients. The cows through their rumen are digesting and then defecating, and this is fertilizing the soil. Will you speak more to what is happening and why this is so good for grasslands?
Well, I think let's be thinking about how that's a big question.
It is a big question.
And I'm thinking about how to dig into it and do it justice. I'm going to give it a try. The first piece here, and it was one of Savory's early insights, and I often wondered how on earth we're going to do this, was if you want a piece of land to stay healthy, you have to keep the animal component there. Why? Because that's how nature has evolved over millions of years. Simple why. Big, more direct why. If you think of what it takes for plants to decompose in an arid environment or an arid tending environment where you have a dry season and a wet season, when there's moisture around, plant material decays year round because of moisture. Whether it's hot or cold, it'll be much faster when it's hot, but when it's cold, it's still breaking down. As soon as you go to a place where it's dry for part of the year, then the nutrient cycle stops. Boom, it's over. Until you might get a little bit of fungal decay, you probably get more chemical decay. I don't know if you know wetter environments. I know parts of Oregon are really arid, parts are really wet, but you think of the divide from the wet to the dry. If you pass a piece of land in Oregon that is arid and there's standing trees or grass there, what does it look like? And you think of the wet side, what does it look like? In the summer, on the wet side, there's no organic material. The bugs have chewed it up and they've cycled it through the roots and whatever into the forest and gone. On the dry side, where there's very limited rainfall and you've got grass or shrubs, they go gray and they just stand there. And they'll stand there for years. Maybe the snow will knock it down, but if the snow doesn't knock it down, it's years and years and years. That will not happen on the wet side of the mountains.
Yeah.
So if you think about an efficient and effective nutrient cycle, you've got an effective nutrient cycle in those rainforesty, very wet, very moist parts of Oregon. On the dry side, without animals, you've got no mineral cycle to speak of. It stands there and it's really slow. And if you walk in a national park with low animal numbers and you walk around, you will find a lot of bare ground and you will find a lot of gray plants and you'll find cryptographic soils with that little hard layer. And everyone's saying, stay off. But how did that part of that dry part of Oregon function? There were lots of animals eating everything, cycling that nutrient. Plants and microbial activity can only happen with water and minerals. If you hold that up in the system, dead. The mineral cycle's not working. So what we've done as farmers is replace that mineral cycle with fertilizer. We've got away from the animal component. Tell you a story about a friend of mine in the Western Cape of South Africa, wheat growing area, winter rainfall environment. He's noted that from an economic point of view, wheat farmers in his environment who've got out of livestock integration in their wheat go out of business in a very short time. Sandy soils, low nutrient capacity. When Dad had a small farm with sheep and wheat in a rotation, the fertilizer costs were a lot lower, the microbial populations were a lot healthier. In those sandy environments, they've gone to more and more and more fertilizer and no livestock. Those are the guys who go bankrupt. Not because of the tons they produce, but because of the costs associated. If you extrapolate what I'm saying, you can see the correlation. Now, if you can cut out that fertilizer and it's all kept there and you're doing cover cropping and you're keeping that moisture and you're keeping all of that stuff that makes a healthy soil, suddenly it's a completely different picture. But the animal integration is a really important part of it. As a gardener, you'll recognize if you don't make compost, what happens in your garden? Now, compost is replacing the part of the animal. I would say you are actually making a gut digester and you're putting that compost. Now, you can't do that on a massive scale, right? On big acreage, but you mimicking what a gut does, what a rumen does to an extent with a compost heap. It's moist, it's warm, it's all of the stuff that a rumen does. You take the rumen away, what do you got? That's as simple and simplistic as I can think about to answer your question. Yeah.
It's well put.
Great. That's really great.
I wanted to ask if you could share a real life success story, someone who switched from ranching conventionally to holistically and what that process looked like.
Ooh, there are so many examples, Andrew, and they're very unique and very, there's so many ways to skin a cat, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about. And very often it's pretty personal. I mean, I think of just up the road from where I live now in North Texas is Birdwell Clark Ranch. Here's Emery Birdwell, who's came to holistic management, struggled with a cow-calf operation, really understood the principles, and then decided to do this really intensively, get out of cow-calf because of the economics, and go into stocker feeding and really look at what's happening on the land, really look at what's happening with weight gains, and making sure that the weight gains on his herd are where they should be, and that the ecology is is improving as it should be. And I call it walking the tightrope. It's making sure that your animal performance is on par, and that you're grazing, moving frequently enough that the animal weight gains are there and not coming back too soon, and playing all the variables of rainfall and market into that, and have had massive success at repairing what was a very degraded farm, restoring deep-rooted perennial plants. But it's an entire business model that they've built. Jonathan and Kaylin Cobb, also in Texas, gone from really conventional cropping, growing corn and mostly corn and soy, lots of chemicals, big tractors, big debt, huge input costs and risk. And they've started planting cover crops initially, got into cattle, then tried out some sheep, and then got rid of the cattle because of the cash flow on the sheep. And all that time building organic material, grazing effectively, increasing the number of forbs and grasses and depth of root, and went into producing ewe lambs as their speciality, with no need for dewormers and the addictive costs. Just by managing and selecting, they now have a sheep that they never ever deworm, they never drench. They've developed a specialized market for their sheep that don't need this in a moist part of Texas, and have hugely increased the number of animals that they can carry, and developed a niche market in line with what they want for a lifestyle. I mean, I love listening to Jonathan talk about, well, we as humans, modern humans, just have far too higher expectations of what land can deliver. It's not that the land can't deliver, it's that our expectations of what the land can deliver are out of whack. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. We demand all the modern foreign overseas trips and a nice fancy car and a this and a that. But is that really what we need and want? Or is that just what we think we want out of default? Does that bring us happiness and joy? It's all interrelated, of course, but I mean, those are just two stories from fairly close by that I love to tell. Yeah.
I'm a huge horse lover. I'm curious if you've heard of anyone doing using horses to be part of regenerative farming, and if it's possible.
Well, Alejandro Correa did a talk at SRM as part of the lineup at Society for Rangeland Management week before last. He was talking a lot about how he uses donkeys, which are close to horses, equines, and very, very successfully, because they are much less selective. They bulk grazers. They're going to help with accelerating that mineral cycle dramatically. There's an Australian guy originally from Zimbabwe. I think he's in northern Queensland. There's a lot of controversy about destroying feral donkeys in that part of Queensland, and he's taken on these feral donkeys to make them into into landscape management tools, and he's won some pretty significant awards using feral donkeys as landscape management tools for exactly that, improving ecosystem function, getting the timing between when they're there and come back. Those mega marsupials, megafauna marsupials that are now extinct from Australia, he's using the donkeys to do what they would have done. Yes, they've got hooves. A lot of people say donkeys and horses' hooves are evil. Of course, they're not evil. They've been part of the environment. They just have a different hoof. And if you get the timing right, and you can get a lot of the vegetation through their gut on the ground and recovered, no problem. It all works. Here on Dixon Water Foundation, where I live, my wife works for the foundation. They graze their working horses through a series of paddocks on a
Mm.
small scale and do it pretty successfully. So yeah,
Wow.
it's
Cool.
it's all about time,
The timing.
exposure. Yep, yep.
Yes, that's awesome. Oh, I guess, do you know how, I can look into it later, but do you know how much acreage each, or for a horse particularly, that they would
I
need?
I'm afraid that is so environment and what is happening on your land dependent.
Yeah.
But we can talk about forage assessment.
Haha, let's
How do
do
you
it.
how do you figure out how much forage you have?
Let's decide.
And
Yeah.
I think that's a really good question because there are a lot of starry-eyed dreamers in the world who want to be small-scale farmers and have this idea that with good management you can make miracles. I'm afraid that's just not possible. You've got to start with what you have, and if your
Yeah.
land's not big enough, it's not big enough. Um, but yeah, by measuring how much forage you have and doing a calculation on, we call it animal days per acre, it works pretty much down to tons of dry matter per acre. I'm not exactly sure of a horse, but most animals that live off forage need about 3% of their body mass per day. And if you use that as a rough rule of thumb, what's your dry season? What's your wet season? What's the recovery period? You can figure out pretty accurately um, how much land with the forage you've got, yield you've got, how many animals you can carry for that time, because those are your variables.
Yeah.
It needs time to regrow. What's the regrowth time? And 3% is where you're heading. And that's what we encourage people to do for what we call the dormant season grazing plan when plants aren't growing. That's very, very much your calculation. The sooner you do that calculation and reduce your animal numbers to match that forage,
Mm-hmm.
the safer you'll get through to when it grows again. And the more animals you'll get through, which is really significant. Most ranching people haven't thought about that reality. The sooner you destock, the more you can keep without feeding extra hay. That's a significant calculation. So I'm digressing from your question, but yes,
Well, that's,
it absolutely is possible.
yeah, no, it's so helpful what you just said because I mean, I look around a lot of the ranchers around here, and I can tell they're all overgrazed and they have way too many cattle, and um, they're not moving them, right? So it's just
Yeah.
mostly maybe one or two paddocks that they usually have, but it just looks, I mean, in the summertime here, it's the grasses, they have to feed them hay. And but we have a rancher friend that, I mean, he does the rotational grazing and it's lush grass all summer long. I mean, he does irrigate. But yeah, like it's pretty amazing the difference that it's a stark difference that you can see. But I
So
love the starting point that you mentioned about go based on the dry season or like the
yeah,
dormant season and see, because a lot of the time I'm like looking at, oh, if we want to buy land, the land we're going to buy is probably going to need some work. It's some TLC, and what we would be able to start with is
uh-huh.
much less than where we could get to potentially.
And starting at the right place, numbers wise, is absolutely critical. Not overstocking from the get go and being realistic about what is the timeline. What is the you can't just make land wonderfully productive in a flash. It takes time.
Yeah.
It's wonderfully rewarding as it improves, but being realistic there. Um,
Mhm.
you don't make miracles happen. No rain, no growth. So that's the risk component. What is your dry year like? If it looks like it's going to be a dry year, reacting really soon. You mentioned a word that triggered me, and I think I really want to talk to it if we've got the time. You mentioned the word rotational grazing, and I want to point out that rotational grazing is a good idea, but rotation on a fixed rotation is a really, really bad idea unless you are very conscious of what we were just talking about. How many animals is appropriate for the land. So rotating for the sake of rotating can actually be much more negative than set stock.
Hmm.
In other words, it's the observation piece that's critical.
Hmm.
And it's the getting the movement synchronized with enough recovery time for the plants. And if you're getting it wrong, knowing that you're getting it wrong means that you have to observe. So we talk about monitoring. It's observing that the plants actually have enough time, and not just the first plant to recover, because very often those are the poorer quality, less desirable plants that will recover the soonest. It's which are the grasses that match the environment and that you want to see growing, and have they recovered? Because otherwise you could be actually accelerating the deterioration by just rotating. So the word I like to use, and I'm being really holistic management tease here, but for a reason, is adaptive. We have to do adaptive grazing,
I love that.
not just rotational. So excuse my lecturing moment there.
Oh, it's very good.
I appreciate that. And it's because it's
Mhm.
speaking to this process that you're talking about of observation, and I love what you're saying there of like looking at the specific grasses, especially the grasses that you want to see growing, and really being attentive to that, giving your stocking ratio, how many livestock you have, and then also how frequently you're rotating them, and using that as feedback and knowing when to adjust. It's very complex. Takes a lot of
But it,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. I hear a lot of people talking about the art of grazing. It's actually, if you've got a plan and you implement the plan according to the season as it unfolds, it's really a process. So it doesn't need to be daunting as long as you have the plan. And my selling moment here is holistic management has a fantastic holistic plan grazing process that really enables you to do this without it being ooh.
Yeah.
It's a planning process. If you do, it does take calculation. You know, for the math challenged, but there's a spreadsheet, and you put in the numbers. Yes, you do have to check the numbers, and then you have to. Well, you should not just follow the cattle according to the plan. You move the animals relative to the plan and adjust depending on the growth and the number of animals. So it's an adaptive plan, and that's where the magic comes in for me. It's the planning and being adaptive. That is where the huge gains come from. Autopilot doesn't work because the variables are too many, but it's not as daunting as you have to be this super ecological observer. If you're doing it without a plan, absolutely, because now the variables get in the way, and now you have to be Einstein-like. But if you're following a plan and you're just a person like me who doesn't love math but likes to follow a plan, well, then it really works well.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it reminds me of what you were saying earlier with you and your dad, having that shared plan, shared goal and shared plan, and how that was really unifying for you two to be able to work together, and to in a place where you were experiencing financial stress, continue to take steps forward towards a shared goal.
Andrew, I would say that, I'm, HMI, Holistic Management International, celebrated its 40th anniversary last year, 2024. And that's a huge milestone. And I think
Mm.
the influence that holistic management's had has been absolutely massive. I really think that it's Regen Ag is an offshoot, or a more popular version of holistic management. But I really believe that our challenge in making it grow faster and be more acceptable is in exactly this piece that you've brought up. How do we enable different generations, in some instances, different individuals, in all instances, to understand, share, communicate? And holistic management is one tool to build that cohesive vision. That is a ground. It's a game changing tool to help different people work together more effectively.
Yeah,
And it's a foundational piece for me.
absolutely. And could you share more about what Holistic Management International's doing specifically to help people change the way that they're farming?
Yeah, I mean, we offer this wonderful thing called holistic management. It's a planning framework. It's not a planning framework. It's a management framework. How it works in words is it's creating this shared vision. How do we want to live? What are those values that we want to live on a day-to-day basis? Working through what do we undertake to do to achieve those values on a day-to-day basis? Identifying how the land must be well into the future. So decisions we make, management decisions, choices we make must be in line with that future vision of healthy water, healthy soils, healthy grassland. Um, Being very clear on what that ecological outcome should look like. I like to think about it as that analogy that we were speaking about. I want this kind of grass or these kinds of grasses or plants, if shrubs, depending on which environment you're in. But that's the target that you're heading for. And if you're achieving that, you're much more likely. If it's just very broad, good. The more defined you can be, the more you have to monitor towards, the better. From that, there's a decision-making process that helps us think through not just financial components, but a whole different array of ways of looking at decisions. And then we have these planning procedures, so the financial economic planning process that helps us work out income and cash flow and which enterprises are going to be the most significant for our business. There's ecological monitoring. We've got a number of different ecological monitoring tools, from pretty in-depth to pretty straightforward, depending on your level and what you're wanting to do, because without the monitoring, you can't make the progress. You don't know when you're on and when you're off because it's a complex environment. Yeah, that's, if it's crop planning, we have a crop planning procedure. How are you going to plan for the crops, for the different elements of a crop production cycle, so that you're making the progress and can adapt relative to the plan? Lots of monitoring built into all of the planning procedures. So whether it's the economic component or the grazing component, there's continual feedback in those planning procedures to help you understand where you are, get better information over time. And then, how we monitor the quality of life piece. Every time you make a decision, your quality of life is part of that decision-making process. When you set up the plans, the goal, the holistic goal that we talk about, is fundamental in creating the plan. I'd go as far as to say, if you don't have a clear idea of what you want, you can't proceed with the testing procedure. It's that central. So it's built in to this management framework. Quality of life's built in, economics is built in, ecology is built in, ecological processes, I should say, because I think being definitive, that's what we're talking about. Is the water cycle getting better? Is the nutrient cycle getting better? Is excuse me, is the diversity of plants and animals improving or deteriorating? If it's getting simpler, you're doing something wrong. That's all mapped out and planned in what holistic management is.
That's great. And if folks are interested in getting in touch with you, Wayne, interested in learning more about Holistic Management International, where's a good place to direct them?
Our website, holisticmanagement.org, would be a great place to start. We've redone our website recently, so if you haven't been there for a while, it'd be a good place to have a look.
Great.
Awesome.
And we'll link that in the show notes. I can attest I've spent some time on the website and you all have done a great job with it. A lot of helpful resources there. So yeah, Wayne, appreciate you taking the time
Been
today
wonderful.
to be on the podcast. Really engaging conversation.
Fantastic. Thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate it, both of you.